So hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sue Frawley. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Community and Family Services Coordinator for GLIS, and I appreciate you coming this evening. We're doing a special presentation this evening for parents and for youth who may be attending as well. It is my honor tonight to introduce you to Mr. Chris Phillips, who is from the Elder Law Center, and I'm going to let Chris introduce himself and the things that Chris is involved in, and especially this evening, Chris is going to talk to us about some of the legal journeys for name change and other that transgender youth will be walking through. So Chris, welcome and have at.
Thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for having me. I think this is a really wonderful program that you all have. And I'm just so thrilled that I can be here today with you. I'm going to try and share my screen. So just bear with me a moment with the tech here. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. So as Sue mentioned, my name is Chris Phillips. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm a staff attorney at the Center for Elder Law and Justice. I'm going to apologize in advance for my casual look. My office is very hot. We run on a boiler system here, so the heat is still on and it's 80 degrees out. So I'm a little sweaty and I apologize about that, but if you'll bear with me, that would be appreciated. So as Sue mentioned, today I'm just really going to briefly touch upon some commonly occurring legal issues that LGBT youth might face, in particular transgender youth. As you might notice here on the first slide, I'm from the Center for Elder Law and Justice. So I will caveat this presentation with the fact that the program that I oversee, called the Silver Pride Partnership here at the Center for Elder Law and Justice, typically does serve adults age 50 years young and up. So I don't really specialize in youth issues per se, but you know, youth and older adults alike face similar issues, I think, and the law is similar and applies equally to both of them in many cases. So this is just a general plug for my agency and my program here. We generally do a lot with advanced planning, so powers of attorney, healthcare proxies, and wills. We do handle name and gender marker changes for eligible clients, discrimination complaints, and some long-term care resident advocacy. Again, the eligibility criteria for our program here, as it stands right now, is age 15 up, 200% of the federal poverty level, and self-identifying as LGBTQ+. So that aside, the shameless plug, we can maybe get into sort of our first topic that I wanted to touch upon today, and that is the legal name change process. This can certainly be a very informal talk. I have the slides here, but if you have questions, that's why I'm here. I may not be able to answer them. I can definitely look into that if it's an area that I haven't encountered, if it's specific to youth or what have you, but feel free to drop that into the chat, which I think either Michael or Sue probably can monitor, and I can address it probably at the end. Okay, so the legal name change process. So, the legal name change process can be a little daunting for sort of outsiders, even for myself as an attorney. It's going to the court, having to petition, provide all these documents. And so really my hope is just to sort of give you broad strokes of this process, not really particulars. If you have questions about particulars, then I think, consulting with an attorney of your choosing probably is best, but hopefully you'll get a feel for the process and whether it's worthwhile for you or your children, as the case may be. So the first question I have here is sort of, do I need a court order to change my name? So of course, as many questions in the law, there's a yes and there's a no. So generally speaking, you don't necessarily need a court order to change your name if you're just changing it by usage. So in New York State, there's a pretty long common law tradition of being able to adopt whatever name you want just by using that name. So what common law means is basically a fancy way of saying judge-made law, so court cases. So courts for several decades have ruled that, you don't necessarily need a court order to change your name. You can adopt a name. You say, no, I'm going by this name, and that is going to be sufficient in most respects. And, you're free to do that. However, where it gets dicey is when you bring in third parties, right? Who say, well, why is this your name? It's not on your birth certificate. It doesn't match your legal documents, right? So that's where the yes comes in for the do I need a court order question. And so it's yes if you want to ensure that third parties honor that name change and change legal documents, which I'll touch upon briefly. So generally speaking, if you're dead set on that name change, you definitely want to go ahead with it. The name change court order process is maybe looking good for you. So here is just my little very reduced version of the bird's eye view of the name change process here in New York State. So the name change process here is governed by Article 6 of the New York Civil Rights Law. It's a statute. It's a law, so it can be kind of dense, but it's pretty short as statutes go. So you can certainly look that up and peruse it if you want. See all the requirements in there. It's pretty user-friendly, I have to say. But really, the process goes something like this. Sort of drop a series of papers, as I mentioned, for the court. Sounds really easy, right? Oh, just submit some papers, but the papers can be pretty complicated and drawn out. Once those papers are drafted, you submit them to either the Supreme Court or the county court. When I say Supreme Court, it sounds, oh, that's like the highest court in the land, but New York is sort of flip-flopped, and I don't understand why this is, but the New York State Supreme Court is the lowest court of general jurisdiction here in New York State. So it's the lowest trial court, but it's called the Supreme Court because that makes sense, right? But anyway, don't mean to be crass, so that you submit it to either the Supreme Court or the county court. Of course, there's a fee associated with that, which I'll touch upon later. Thereafter, you'll be assigned a judge, and more often than not, the judge will just decide that on the papers. I'll tell you that, I'm a pretty new lawyer, and I just handled my very first name change application this week. And it was my first one, and it went to a hearing. I talked to another advocate who has done about 400 name changes over their career, and they've had 3 hearings. So I don't think it's a very common occurrence. Mine was just a little complicated. So that, if all the papers look good, if there's nothing really for the judge to be concerned about, that they might just grant it on the papers without having a hearing. And then as the law stands right now, once that final order, once the judge signs that order, then notice has to be published in a newspaper of that name change. The statute has some information about what needs to be included in that newspaper. And it's important to know that there are ways to waive this requirement, because it can be a very personal thing, changing your name, and a lot of individuals might not actually want that out there for the general public, and that is totally understandable. So I'll talk a little bit about the publication requirement and the waiver requirement as well. And then I have my confetti here at the end. I don't know if you can see it, but we got the final name change, right? Once you've satisfied all those requirements, you've got that legal document, that court order, that you can go ahead and say to the world, this is my name. So that is the general overview. And now I'm just going to dive into sort of the particulars. I don't know if I saw a chat, but maybe if there's like a question that maybe is urgent, maybe Sue can stop me. Or
there was, and it just, the question was, what is the purpose of having to publish the notice in the newspaper, and how often does that get waived?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the idea of that is that when someone changes their name, basically we want to show that they're not doing it for a fraudulent reason. They're not doing it to escape their creditors. They're not doing it to escape their obligations. So I'll talk about what we have to put in the petition for the name change in the papers, but it's being like putting the world on notice that, hey, this person has changed their name. So that's the idea behind it, right? How realistic is that? I don't go to the Buffalo Law Journal and look at the name change. Who does that? I don't know of anyone who does that. So they're looking, I think, to change that, right? So, which I think would be very welcomed. So that was the first questions. How often is it waived? I really don't know, like percentage wise. I think that for transgender applicants in particular, it is waived very commonly, which is really great. The courts have been very clear in recent years that, you know, basically to get it waived, jumping ahead a little, but you have to show some sort of fear for your personal safety if that's published. And given the really sad and unfortunate literature out there about transgender individuals and sort of what they face day to day, the courts have been generally, you know, very all right with waiving that requirement, given that literature and given that research. So I think it's good news. I don't think it's very hard to do. In my name change application, I got it waived, even though my client had sort of a complicated case too. So I think it's common for our purposes for transgender individuals. I think that's very common. Okay. So I will go on to sort of what are these papers that need to be filed in our first step. There's a long list here, a lot of things that are, if you're not an attorney, you might, you know, not care about. Basically, there's application for an index number, a request for a judicial intervention. Potentially, if there's, you know, an applicant who can't really afford the filing fee, potentially they can get that waived through some sort of certificate of indigence. They have really antiquated language in the law. I don't like that. Poor person affidavit, like that's all terrible, but that's what they call it. The petition, though, is really what's going to be the meat and potatoes of the application. So it's what's going to really set forth what's required in the law and why we're changing the name. Along with that petition, we might have some exhibits. So an original or a certified birth certificate has to be included in that. And then, you know, whatever other supporting documents there might be, criminal records, judgments, liens, what have you. For youth or minors, that they may not have tons of criminal records or judgments, but they might, who knows. Then you also submit with the papers sort of a proposed final order, which I remember, you know, starting out in law school and interning and seeing court happen, it was kind of weird. The attorney actually drafts the order. So I'll actually draft the order for my client that the judge will sign, and then the judge will let me know if there's a change that needs to be made. But we have that order in there of what we want the relief to be. Then we can also include a proposed temporary sealing order and a memorandum of law. So the proposed temporary sealing order, we can have these documents temporarily sealed under a provision in the law. Basically what that means is that if it's not sealed, it's going to be out there. It's going to be a public record. So once you submit these papers, if the filing is not sealed, then anyone can access it, right? Anyone can go online to NYSEF, the New York State Court electronic filing system, and they can search up your name and pull up your court papers. And some of that, I mean, it's going to have, as we'll see, your date of birth, address, I mean, sensitive information, right? So the temporary sealing order, I think, is granted, again, pretty commonly, but that's something to consider as well. If, for example, you know, I'm working with another client who's changing one letter of the first name. So I don't know that, you know, they're not transgender, this particular client. So they might be fine with just having that open record. But, you know, that's something to consider, is the sealing order. In addition to sort of the waiver of publication, they kind of go hand in hand. And then the memorandum of law is typically something that like attorneys submit. So it's something that we'll submit to put forth our arguments, like cases. If you are doing this pro se, so if you don't have an attorney, that might be kind of, I mean, we've been trained all throughout law school to do this, right? So that might be a little arduous for you to do. So that's not required, certainly, by any means. It's just to put forth those arguments and bolster those. So that's sort of what it looks like. So now I'm going to just be talking a little bit about what's required in that petition, that actual substantive document that we submit to the court, outlining why the name change should be proper and what's going on with the name change. So the law requires that we have certain information in the petition, such as what you'll see on the screen. So the current address of, I say petitioners, because typically I'm helping my client themselves petition the court. If you're a parent, for example, doing this for a minor, you might be the petitioners and they might be what's called under the law the infant, even though they might be like 16, 15 years old. They're infant or minor under the law. So we're going to need that the child's current address, their place of birth, their date of birth, their current age, their current legal name. I don't know, I don't have that on there, but of course their current legal name, and then also their proposed name, their marital status, their spousal or child support obligations. This probably won't come up for most youths. Someone might owe spousal support obligations, but I don't know. It's probably unlikely, but it's required. So it might seem a little silly to put it in the petition, but we're checking off requirements in the statute. So we just have to say there's no spousal support obligations. It's not something that we can just kind of skip. You also have to report criminal convictions. It's important to know that these are only convictions, right? So not any charges, but if they've actually been convicted of a crime. Also need to include bankruptcy, whether there's current or past bankruptcy proceedings, any judgments or liens of record against the individual, any pending actions or assignments to creditors. So again, this is why the idea behind the publication requirement. If someone is filing for bankruptcy and changing their name, they might be trying to get out of that. Or if they have all these judgments against them, they might be trying to avoid that. Or a lot of criminal convictions, they might just want to start all over and have a new name. But that's not really what this process is meant for. So that's why we have to just include in there. I will say that, the client that I worked with, they did have some criminal convictions way in the past, some bankruptcies. They currently owe some child support obligations, but those were not barriers. We got the name changed. There was a few more hoops we had to jump through. And so it was good that I think this client was working with an attorney, right, on this case, because I could jump through those hoops a little easier probably. And so then really what we need in the petition is we need to state a reason for the proposed name change. And this really can be any non-fraudulent reason that we want. And this is going to be really fact specific. So, it might be because I don't like my name, but it might be because my name doesn't conform with my gender identity, and that's good enough. That is totally more than good enough. And so you just have to sort of lay that out. And maybe give some facts. We don't really need medical evidence, though, interestingly. There's no real medical evidence needed in a name change court proceeding. So that's a good thing. And it's actually probably improper for the court to ask for that. So we just, saying, my gender identity is not reflected in this name is probably going to be fine. You can maybe include some more facts about a particular case that you might be experiencing. So that's the petition. It sounds easy enough. It is. It's kind of just a form, right? But it can get a little complicated. So yeah, that's a good thing. I see in the chat here. Yeah, if they required medical evidence, it would just be terrible. And yeah, I don't see why they would need that.
Chris, can I ask a question? If a young person is pre-operative, can they still change their name? And does that gender reflection have any other impacts on, say, birth certificate or other educational or medical records?
Absolutely. So that's a really good question. So, you know, as I'm sure you know, I don't want to preach to the choir here, but the gender identity is your gender identity, right? No matter what your gender expression is. Um, so you can change whatever sort of stage you are at medically. You can change your name. You can change your name if your gender identity does not match that name, or if you have another non-fraudulent reason. As far as changing like gender markers and things on certain documents, that might require sort of a physician's letter, which I'll talk about later, stating that they've undergone like a certain level of clinical treatment to change that gender marker change, have that gender marker change. But there's also talks in the law of sort of combining these because they're like really separate now. So I'm picking on my client because it's fresh in my mind, but the client had, they changed their gender marker on the driver's license, but they didn't change their name, right? They had the doctor's note, but they didn't change the name yet. And so it was kind of weird because that didn't match on their document. They had one name and then was stereotypically the opposite sort of, or a different gender. So I guess the answer to that is, no, we don't need that doctor's letter necessarily for the name change. Does that sound good? Yeah, answer the question there. Okay. All right. And now I will go to, oh yeah. So I already kind of talked about this a little, the reason for the petition. We just want a non-fraudulent reason. It's important to note that the application can't be denied simply because the petitioner or the whatever applicant is a transgender individual. There's really sad, horrible case law that's luckily been overturned that was, oh, they didn't provide sufficient evidence, i.e. they didn't provide medical documentation or another terrible reason to deny a name change. But I think the courts, generally speaking, are being more and more favorable. And the appellate courts, so where, if you're denied the name change petition, if you appeal it, they've been very good about these as well, particularly for transgender individuals. Again, medical proof is not going to be required. And there's really great case law that in the petition, you can use proper pronouns. So even if, you're saying the petitioner would like to change her name, if those are her pronouns, great. Even if that doesn't really seem to jive with their legal name currently. But that's good to know that you can have those proper pronouns in the court papers. Usually, it's all really going to be up to the judge. The judge will have some discretion here, but there's some good cases on this issue. So the boring part about like logistics of filing this, it's all kind of boring, right? But really, we're going to either file it at the county court or the New York State Supreme Court where the applicant resides. There's the online system, as I mentioned, NYSEF, the New York State Court electronic filing system. Sorry, I always botch that in my head. And so you can just submit it on there now, pay a filing fee. Of course, it's like $210. So it's not nothing, right? This can be waived if an applicant is low income. So either you submit an application to a court for poor person status, as I mentioned, antiquated language, but this is something that you do yourself. It's really discretionary to the judge and it's kind of a long wait. So if you work with an attorney, especially one who's like a public service attorney, such as myself, you file a certificate of indigency. And so what that is basically I'm certifying that I work for a legal services agency, that I've determined that my client does not have the funds to pay for this, and that's going to be fine. So consideration, right, about whether or not to work with an attorney or not. I'm going to kind of address that a little later, but it's good to know that there might be a cost associated with filing. There's also going to be some costs with publication potentially. So if you have to publish that, you might actually have to pay the newspaper to print the name change. And then when there might be another cost associated with getting like certified copies of that order later on. So again, this publication requirement, if the judge determines that there's not really a good enough reason to waive publication, the name change will have to be published in an approved newspaper, which the judge will select within 60 days. Of course, there's a cost here. And thereafter, you have to file an affidavit of publication, which is basically a form that the newspaper will provide to you. And you have to file that with the court clerk, where all the rest of the papers are signed, within 90 days of the order being signed. And then at that point, if publication is required, that's when the order is legally effective. It's when all of the requirements have been met of the statute. Again, the waiver of the publication, though, is ideal in many respects, but particularly it saves costs too, and it saves a headache. So waiver of a publication, the applicants may ask the court to seal the name change records and waive the publication requirement. There is a particular case that the case that I just handled. I also asked for the initials, I'm sorry, the caption to be redacted. So basically you can still search it online. So you could still search an individual's name, and the caption will look something like, in the matter of the application of the person's current name for leave to assume the name and then their proposed name. So if you follow that, if you type someone's name in, you can kind of see what they changed their name to, and you can sometimes guess, you know, oh, this particular person might be transgender. And some people, sick people, right, might take issue with that. So that's another thing to consider too, is that, you know, you can seal the name change records, you can waive the publication, and then have an anonymous caption, particularly where there's maybe a minor involved. This is really highly recommended for transgender and gender nonconforming individuals or clients, particularly because of the personal safety sort of arguments that are unfortunately all over in the case law and in the news and literature. There's really going to be no need for actual personal history of targeted violence or abuse. So you don't actually have to experience like some sort of threat or violence yourself. It's usually sufficient to just say that, you know, if you are transgender and applying for a name change, that, you know, there's literature out there that potentially, you know, shows that my personal safety would be jeopardized by this. So you don't actually yourself need to experience that. And then you can, of course, support this request with the facts in your petition if you unfortunately and sadly have already faced some sort of discrimination or hateful comments. My client did face that, unfortunately. You can put that in there. And this is also where a memorandum of law, possibly by an attorney, might be helpful, just to cite those cases and show why it's proper to waive that. Even if this is waived, publication in the newspaper is waived, there might be still some requirements for personal notice, like notifying specific entities or persons. So for example, if only one parent or guardian petitions, the other parent or guardian will, or however many there may be, has to be served notice of this name change. Particular law enforcement agencies, if someone's, for example, in a correctional facility, they might have to notify certain individuals. If an individual's on a sex offender registry, it's going to be probably really hard to get that waived, unfortunately. Well, but there's certain entities that probably will have to be notified of that. Courts, if there's other actions, they're going to have to know about the name change as well, and possibly immigration services. But really, if the judge determines, like in my case, there was some child support obligations due, we had to notify the child support collections unit. So the judge will determine who needs to get notice of that if they have to. Okay, so now I'm trying to address some of the questions that Sue had sent me. So this was sort of one that came up. So at what age can you legally change your name? And basically, you know, a name can be legally changed at any age, excuse me. But it's just a matter of whether parental consent is going to be required. So if you're 18 years old or older, there's going to be no consent needed from your parent. You can just petition for yourself, hire an attorney on your behalf, right? But you're not going to need your parents' consent or guardian's consent for that. If you're 17 years old and younger, I'm sorry, there's a little typo there. You're going to need parental consent for this application. So, either both of your parents or guardians or all of your parents' guardians can petition, or maybe one of them can with notice to the others. It's probably easiest if all parents or guardians petition at once, just so that notice doesn't have to be served. But that either way it can happen. And then for those 14 years or older, the court may require that the child actually consents to the name change, but this might vary with the court. That kind of addresses that question of when can you legally change your name.
Chris, there's a question.
Oh.
If a parent petitions for their child to do a name change, but the other parent does not agree, how does that affect the process?
Yeah. Huh. I hadn't thought of that, to be honest, but I could see it coming up, definitely. It's not something
I'm talking about 17 and under, of course.
Yeah, I haven't encountered this, and I probably won't with my current age limit, because 15 up, you don't need parental consent. But I'm inclined to say that if that is the case, there might be a hearing, and the judge will hear from both sides. If the one parent would like to conduct this name change, the other disagrees, they're going to have to go before the court and probably make their arguments. And so in that case, it's sort of like a contested hearing. So it might be smart to hire a lawyer if it's feasible. But yeah, I think in that case, the court will hear both sides and ultimately decide what's best. So yeah, it's not going to be the simple check, yep, you met all the requirements necessarily. But it doesn't mean that there's going to be a barrier necessarily. There might just be a few more hoops, as I mentioned.
Yeah. Now we have that sometimes where one parent is supportive of the transgender youth,
yeah.
the other parent is not.
Yeah.
And this is something that has come up. And people question, well, what do I do? Or they just assume they can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
They would not be able to go forward. So that's why I put the question to you of, could they go forward? And, I'm guessing the courts always have a process for everything.
Yeah, there's going to be probably a hearing, and I don't think there's anything in the statute. I mean, there has to be notice to that person, but it's like any other contested thing, right? To people not getting along about something, and this is particularly heartbreaking because it's their child and their the child's life that they're not getting along about. But I mean, family court, that's sort of what comes up in family court oftentimes as well. But the court will consider both sides and make a reasoned decision. Okay. So then the question is, can I do this myself? I.e., do I need a lawyer to do this? I don't want to pay attorney's fees. I get it. Trust me. It can be quite expensive. So the answer is that you can do this yourself. And if it's a relatively uncomplicated one, I don't know what that means. I mean, maybe there's not a lot in the application. There's going to be no fighting between parents or guardians. There is a really helpful website, New York State Court Help website. I put the link here. I won't read it out, but as you can see, I took a little screen grab. It's a little small, but there's sort of at the sort of bottom, a child name change petition program. So if you're a pro se litigant, meaning you don't have an attorney, you can follow through this program. I haven't done it myself, to be honest, but it's my understanding that it sort of auto-populates some of the papers so that it might make it a little easier to submit to a court. You can try certainly to do that. Or, you can consider hiring an attorney. Oh yeah, thank you so much for dropping that. That's really great. So yeah, that's that question. I mean, if you, however, would like to hire an attorney, I would love to say come see me, but you know, if you are a youth yourself or you're petitioning for a youth, there are some other resources that I might direct you to here. I'm not aware of really any attorney, like legal services attorney, who focuses primarily on this. And Sue or Michael, you can correct me if you found one, that's great. But as we were discussing, there's probably not one. There's a gap in services. What else is new, right? But there's some really great resources around. Neighborhood Legal Services is another legal services agency here in Buffalo. They have a medical legal partnership with Evergreen Health. So I don't know, I really don't know what their eligibility criteria is for this, but if you or your child are getting treatment over at Evergreen, you might just want to call and see if you might qualify. I think they do handle name change applications. And their phone number is 716-847-0650. And we have the Supreme Court Help Center. You're not going to get to talk to someone like RBG, unfortunately. It's not that kind of Supreme Court. It's the New York State Supreme Court Help Center, but they are equally, they're great and they're really great resources. You can talk to them about sort of the process, the online form that we just dropped in the chat for you. Or maybe they might know of a resource that could help you. So they're at 716-845-9400. Also have a website if you want to just Google that. And then typically, if I'm talking with someone and they want to find a private attorney to pursue this, a really good place to start is the Erie County Bar Association. They have what's called the Lawyer Referral and Information Service. You just call them. It's my understanding that you pay like a nominal fee, so $20 or something, and you get a 30-minute consultation with an attorney. You tell them what you're looking to do. I would like to do a name change. You tell them, and they link you with an attorney who does that. And you can talk with them about costs and if it's worthwhile or whatnot. And their phone number is 716-852-3100. Okay. So that is the name change process and where you can go for more information. I hope that was helpful. The next thing is that I want to talk about. How are we doing on time? We have till 7:30. Yeah, okay. So changing legal documents. I'll just briefly go through this. So changing gender marker on legal documents. It's going to depend on what document, right? But generally speaking, we're going to look for an original letter that is addressed to an agency that's written and signed by a doctor. So we're going to want an MD, a DO, or a PsyD individual with one of those degrees to actually be signing that letter, stating that the client has received, and this is the wording of the law, right, appropriate clinical treatment for gender transition. So it's broad on purpose, I think. So I think a lot of doctors, especially those who are working with transgender individuals specifically, would be willing to do this, I think, if they deem it appropriate. If you have that letter, then you can go ahead and start changing gender markers on DMV documents, so the driver's license, non-driver ID, something like that. Social Security Administration documents. It's kind of weird, right? Because your Social Security card doesn't have your gender marker, but you could potentially just change it with the agency. Passport. Important to note, I think with passport currently, the only options are male and female. There's no like sort of X gender marker that you can put in that. I don't think, as far as I know. Immigration documents, and then with maybe social services as well. Changing your gender marker on your birth certificate. It used to require this in New York State, this doctor's letter, but in 2020, last year, the New York State Department of Health, DOH, policy changed. So individuals 17 and up can apply for it on their own. 16 and younger have to apply via form with both parent signatures. So this is, it's interesting if there's only one parent willing to sign. I don't know what would happen in that case. But really, there's a self-attestation standard for all, which means basically you're saying I'm changing it because this is my gender, and that's good enough. and it is good enough in my opinion. So, and then you submit that with sort of an application they have, of course, and a notarized affidavit of a gender error. Some things might not, there might be just like some errors, like they misspelled someone's name on the birth certificate, and that might be easier to correct. But if you were born, or you or your child was born in another state, important to check that state's law out. Don't want to generalize because some might require additional information for that birth certificate.
Chris, with the notarized affidavit of, it says gender error, and I know that's going to be true for a lot of, but would that be referring to a diagnostic letter from a physician of gender dysphoria? Would that count for that?
So no, and yeah, I don't want you to think that this is my term, right? This is just what they call it. So exactly. I'm not saying your gender is an error. No, it's just what they call it. I think it's a separate form with the DMV. I haven't filled it out myself, but I don't think it's the same as the doctor's letter. Okay. I think it's going to have to be a separate thing. It's probably going to be less work, honestly, because it's just saying like, this is who I am and this is what my gender is. So but the forms are online. So if you just Google like birth certificate correction, New York State, sorry, I don't have the link there for you, but they've got a lot of forms on there and guidance. So that's a good place to look. So then that's changing your gender marker, changing your name on legal documents. This is where it's really helpful to have that name change order. The Social Security Administration, might require both the doctor's letter and name change order. Passport similarly has all kinds of crazy things, right? They have their own form, DS-11 form, doctor's letter, name change order, certified birth certificate, if you're not submitting an existing passport, and then your passport photo, things that you'll need for any passport, right? Your photo ID, and of course payment. And other documents you can consult really with that individual policy for that agency, that school, the bank, whatever the case may be. They might have their own requirements, but if you have that name change order, that's going to be gold, really. Might be some other things you have to submit, but that's sort of I think the most difficult thing to get, because you have to go to the court and blah blah blah, do all this stuff. So once you have that, I think hopefully it's not easy, but it's definitely easier. Okay. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about navigating schools. I was talking with Sue and Michael earlier. I don't really come across this in my practice. My clients aren't in school usually. So they're the experts. They seem to have a really great handle on what goes on in schools and how you can best serve yourselves or your children in schools. But I will just say, I was talking with my mother. So my mother actually works at a school called the Big Picture program in the Kenton School District, and she has a number of transgender students, I think, that she works with. And so I was just sort of picking her brain what they sort of do. And so really at the school, you have a number of rights, right? You have a right to do things that match your gender identity, including being called the proper name and pronouns. Attend your school without being bullied, of course. I mean, it's a no-brainer, but unfortunately happens, right? You have the right, of course, to use proper restrooms and locker rooms. It's my understanding that as of I think March, schools are required to have access to gender-neutral restrooms. You of course can you have the right to dress and present yourself according to your gender identity. You have a right to your privacy about transgender status or your medical history, and you have the right to do fun things, right? You start clubs and engage with people, and so there are rights, and there's really helpful publications from the National Center for Transgender Equality. I put the link there. And also the trans student educational resources. You may already be aware of these, and I didn't include the TSER link because it was like broken today. I couldn't access it. So you can just Google that.
You raise a good point, Chris, because the biggest question that comes up, the biggest, is bathrooms. And you talked about the current law, which is only about single stall bathrooms.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, because the first thing that comes up with schools is, well, we've got a 5-seater in the girls' room or the boys' room. So what do we do? And do we have to make those gender neutral? No.
Yeah. Yeah. The restroom, I think, has come up a lot, right? And with the name, it's my understanding that there's sort of a way to put like a preferred name in their internal records, right? But I don't think they can actually like change it in the records until you have that name change order.
That's correct. Under FERPA, which has the Family Educational Right to Privacy Act, which is usually about your protection, but it also includes any type of record that a school keeps. And they cannot change a child's legal name for, like that was used for registration,
right,
or for other parts, without a legal name change. However, under DASA, the Dignity for All Students Act in New York State, a student, and just as Chris has outlined, a student may be called and must be called by their preferred name and preferred pronouns in a school, but it cannot legally be changed without that legal name changed.
Yeah. Thank you. You are the expert, so thank you. Definitely. And so yeah, so that's sort of the rights at school. If they're not being honored, that's a problem, right? And really you can start by trying to have conversations with school administrators and staff, social workers. I know a lot of schools have guidance counselors, whatever resources they might have. That's a good place to start. I'll talk a little bit about where else you can go if there's discrimination going on, and other resources that maybe can't be resolved at this level, which would be really sad. But that's maybe a good place to start looking, is having these conversations with administrators and staff. Okay, now I'm just going to briefly touch upon trans-related healthcare considerations for minors. And in particular, I just want to address a question I have here that Sue forwarded me, just about whether parental consent is required for certain treatments, trans-related treatments. And so far as I can tell, there's not a specific law that would allow a minor to consent to trans-related care at this point in time. And that's sort of with any other healthcare. I mean, minors really don't have a lot to say over their healthcare decisions as it stands under the law for trans-related care or any other care. So really, to receive that care, so hormone therapy or sexual affirmation surgery, parental consent is typically going to be required for those individuals that are 17 years old and younger, similar to any other medical treatment. Some individuals might have access to certain mental health services for younger patients. So for minors, I didn't want to delve too deeply into this because it really depends on where that individual is. If it's outpatient or they're like in an actual facility, it might change, right? But you might have access to mental health services, and of course there's all kinds of great resources and hotlines, crisis hotlines as well, if you yourself are listening in a youth and need someone to talk to. Okay, and then finally I just wanted to mention reporting discrimination. So if you or your child is facing discrimination, there are a number of places you can go to sort of report that. The sort of gold standard, in my opinion, is the New York State Division of Human Rights. So they're going to be like the central hub for the state that's enforcing the law that you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, which has really expanded recently to include things such as sexual orientation and gender identity, which is really wonderful. I don't want to bore you with all that history. I have a whole spiel about that, but basically you can go to the New York State Division of Human Rights, DHR's website, www.dhr.ny.gov. They have an online complaint form. They have webinars, they have lots of things to help. But you can file a complaint basically with they'll do some investigation and see if it's substantiated. And if not, there's potentially court remedies that you can appeal that, but it's a whole other complicated mess. So, but if you feel that there's been discrimination, then certainly you can go there. There's a number of federal agencies as well. So the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or employment discrimination, and then U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development HUD for housing. This may not apply necessarily for youth in particular. I don't know many youth who are out there like renting apartments and things like that, but hey, you never know.
We've had families who have a transgender youth who may have been discriminated against because of the youth. So that's all real good information. There's a lot of different circles. So yeah, very good resources, excellent resources.
Yeah, they are good. So definitely call them. Of course, if you feel there's been discrimination, you can bring a lawsuit too, just any old lawsuit. That's probably going to require hiring an attorney though, I would think. It's not as easy, I wouldn't think, as the name change petition, easy, so to speak. Okay, and that is that. So I can certainly open up for questions now. I just wanted to put my contact information here. It's me. You can get me, if you want to chat about this, of course. As I mentioned, my clients are typically 15 up, but if you want to have a brief question, you want to consult, or just want to, talk things through, I'm more than happy to do that. The phone number is there, 853-3087. My direct extension is 283, or you can shoot me an email at cphillips@elderjusticeny.org. Okay. So with that, I could probably stop sharing my screen and
we can unmute. And if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask Chris directly, feel free.
Totally fine if no one wants to speak up. I know these things are a little awkward, so we can connect offline. Certainly, you can put it in the chat. But definitely appreciate you sticking with us this beautiful day.
Was there anything that anyone came expecting to hear about tonight that we did not address in any way? Okay, good.
Well, good. Hey, comprehensive. There we go. Your questions worked, I guess. Yeah.
Well, it came right from our parents. Again, the parent support groups that we run every month. We run one for transgender youth parents. We run another one that's more of an umbrella for LGBTQ plus parents. And it was from those groups that we got those questions. So I'm always appreciative of the parents who show up and who ask. It helps everybody.
Absolutely. And thank you to Michael for putting in the links and everything. So they're there. The PowerPoint, you all have access to that PowerPoint. So if anyone wants that, feel free to, I guess, email Michael or Sue.
Yeah, if after our thing tonight, if something does come up, you can always email me. Let's see if I can actually do this. Michael's going to smile because I am not the tech guru, but I'm going to put my email, which actually most of you may have already received with the invitation to tonight. But if you did not, I'm going to put that in here. I type with one finger. There we go. parentoutreach@glisswesternnewyork.org. And you can always reach me there. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find out and get it back to you. And that is a promise. There's some things we know about. We can definitely help you with issues around DASA, which is the Dignity for All Students Act, and also for GENDA, which is a New York state law, which has an overarching reach to DASA, as Chris was talking about, all the different remedies and ways that one can go back. Some have some teeth, some don't. But we can help you to look at that. And of course, the referrals. Neighborhood Legal Services has been a great referral source as well for some parents when they have had to go to that legal route as well. So, but again, anything we can do, we're there to help you. Any last questions or anything? Because we've got about 2 minutes left in our time this evening. Well, I want to thank Chris, because Chris, this was an outstanding presentation, really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you for being so supportive. I think just showing up at these is really heartwarming, right? So it's really great. And best of luck. And yeah, you got my contact information and Sue's. If you have questions, feel free to shoot it over.
Outstanding. And of course, as always, thank you to Michael. Michael is just, if I didn't have Michael around.
No, we all
was
need a Michael. I think we all need one. We
Yeah,
really like-
Michael's just outstanding. So I just
Yeah.
gotta hold it up to Michael. And to all of you who showed up this evening on the most beautiful evening, and there's still time to go out and smell the beautiful spring air as well. But thank you for being here, and feel free to share the information that you gained from tonight with other parents, because that's one of the things we rely on as well, that parents support each other. I'm sure we'll be talking about this again in groups to come. And so if there isn't anything else, I will bid everybody a great evening. We're going to end our meeting in a moment, and have a great night. Drive safe. From the living room to the kitchen. Goodbye, everybody.
Take care.